White Lilacs, a novel by Carolyn Meyer. Chapter 4. Lessons. That night, after the barbershop closed, we sat at the kitchen table. Nancy Lee and Laura Lee were in their nightclothes chattering about whatever childish thing was on their minds, and Henry mopped up his third plate of greens with a piece of Mama's cornbread. Papa had news. Pastor Mobley came by today, he told us. He says white folks are circulating a petition. I didn't understand what a petition could do. It means, Rosalie, Papa explained, that if enough people sign this piece of paper, then the people of Dillon will vote to decide if we can stay in our homes or if we must move away. They won't say that's what it means, though. They'll say they're voting to raise money to buy up land for a city park. But the land they intend to buy is ours. But can't we vote against it? I asked. And Henry broke his silence with a harsh laugh. I could sense a whole ocean of anger roiling beneath the surface of his calm. I loved my brother and looked up to him. Papa said he was smart and he hoped someday Henry would go to college like Aunt Susanna. He would be the second one in the family, Papa often said proudly. But Henry's anger often frightened me. Like my parents, I was scared it would get him into trouble. Could if they let us. Legally, a black man can vote just the same as a white man can. Fifth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. But they're not going to let us. They are going to make sure that we don't by their various and considerable powers of persuasion. Henry was talking more and more like a preacher, I thought. What did he mean by various and considerable, whatever it was? But then Mama cut in. Women too, Henry, she said. Don't forget that women have their vote now too. But Henry ignored Mama. There's more of them than there is of us, no matter how you count, Henry said. Even if there wasn't, they'd figure it out somehow. It's time we do something, get ourselves together, and take a stand. Why do you think I went down to Dallas and joined up with the UNIA? I told you I didn't want you messing with that bunch of radicals, Henry, Papa warned. That Marcus Garvey is nothing but trouble. What is so radical about Mr. Garvey telling me I'm as good as any white man and equal to him in every way? Maybe it's about time black folks around here get radical, Henry insisted, or all we'll ever have is trouble. I had heard them argue about this before, nobody ever getting anywhere. Henry had joined up with the United Negro Improvement Association and kept telling us that the man to follow was the founder of the association, Marcus Garvey, while Papa and the other men of freedom said the ideas of Booker T. Washington were good enough for them, which is why they named our school after him. Mr. Washington, we were taught, believed the way to equality was through training for jobs. All old Booker ever cared about was training Negroes for jobs to serve old massa better, Henry would argue. Mr. Garvey knows we got to go for a lot more, that we need to form our own nation. He favors going back to Africa, to Libya, where we can be free men. Insisting on our right to stay here, where we belong, is where we've got to take our stand, Papa said. Now, never mind going to Africa. My home is right here, this house, this piece of ground. I leaned one way then the other, depending on who was talking. I wasn't exactly sure where Libya was, which was part of Africa. You better start packing, Papa. Henry's voice was rough, almost to choking with anger, 'cause you're gonna lose. I feared that he was right. Papa sighed, and Henry shoved back his chair and stomped out, which was how most of these arguments ended. This was the time I had been planning to tell Mama and Papa about Miss Firth and her art class, and how she had invited me to be in it, but I had to wait for things to calm down, and before I could say anything, Papa turned to me. "Rosalie," he began, "I'm going to ask you to do something I have an idea you won't want to do." There was hardly anything Papa ever asked me that I didn't want to do. Not like Mama, who always wanted me to do things I would rather not, like taking down the wash from the lines in the backyard or looking after my little sister. "What, Papa?" "From now on, you're going to take Cora's place at Mrs. Bell's. Now that school's out, you'll have time." I set my glass down and stared at him, hoping I hadn't heard right. "How come?" "Because Cora is still feeling poorly, and she needs to stay off her feet." "But she's big and strong," I protested, "and she's been doing it and knows how to do it, and I don't." "Cora's gonna have a baby," Mama explained, "and you can learn. Aunt Tilly's going to teach you everything you need to know. She said you did real good the other day when you took Cora's place." "But there must be somewhere else," I argued, although I knew it wasn't going to make a bit of a difference. Their minds were made up. I didn't understand how much I hated serving at table. Leave me out in the garden and I was happy. But don't ask me to go inside that grand house where everything was too costly, too fragile, too subject to mistake or carelessness. I recalled my misery with the soup bowls, lower left, raised right. "Besides," Mama added, "you'll get paid." That put a different light on it. "How much?" $1 a week, after you learn everything and your lunch. "You know we can use the extra money." "Yes, ma'am. I wondered if I would be allowed to keep any of it. I wanted to buy a real sketch pad and maybe some colored pencil." Then I went ahead and told them what Miss Emily Firth had said. How could they say no, especially if I agreed to being their serving maid? "Huh," Mama said. "Did this fine lady say where her art classes are to take place and who's all to be in it?" "No, she said it wouldn't cost anything and she'd get your permission." "Don't get your hopes up too high, Rosalie, and see them dashed." Papa cleared her throat. "About the bells," he said, "there's something else." I waited to hear what this something else was. "You keep your ears open, all right? Pay attention like you did before, and hear what's said and remember it all. You understand, baby?" "You mean about their plans to get rid of freedom?" I said in a flat voice, trying to keep the shake out of it. He nodded. "You want this child to be a spy, in other words," Mama said, and I understood from her tone that this was something they didn't agree on. For once I was on Mama's side. "Call it what you want, Elvie, but if we're to make our plans, we need to know their plans. Maybe they'll talk in front of her like they did before. It will help. Every bit will help." Papa turned to me. "Well, Rosalie?" "I'll do it, Papa," I said, dreading it but thinking maybe Henry was right. We had to resist or go someplace else. And since I didn't want to go to Africa, I had to do what I could do to help. The next day, Aunt Tilly brought me Cora's black uniform cut down to size. "Make sure the apron's always clean and starched," she said. "Miss Bell is real fussy about that. And you've got to pay attention so I can teach you things before you go making mistakes like you did last time." So now there were lessons in Miss Eunice Bell's dining room every morning after Aunt Tilly had given the family their breakfast and we had washed the dishes and shined up the kitchen together. I had to learn the name and use of every kind of knife, fork, and spoon, every kind of plate, bowl, cup, and saucer, every kind of tablecloth, napkin, and placemat, every kind of glass and goblet. In addition, there were platters and covered dishes and gravy boats, and special silver forks and spoons and dippers to go with them. All the dishes were displayed in the china closet with the curving glass front, and the linens were laid in particular drawers in the sideboard, and the silver wrapped in soft cloths and kept in a wooden box lined with felt. It would be my job to set the table for each meal as soon as Miss Bell let us know how many were expected. That part was not so hard once I learned how Miss Bell wanted everything. For instance, I had to remember that the china plates were to be put on the table right side up. At home, Mama taught us to set the table with the plate turned upside down so it wouldn't get dusty. You turned it over when you sat down to eat right after the blessing. But Miss Bell didn't worry about dust because the street outside her house was paved and there was grass everywhere, not plain dirt that was always mud about to turn to dust about to turn into mud. Serving the food was a different story. Sometimes all Miss Bell wanted for me was to carry in the bowls of vegetables and platters of meat and to set them on the table and let folks pass the food around among themselves. Then Miss Bell would say, "You may go now," trailing off because she was still thinking of Cora and never could seem to remember my name. She called that family style, but it was not like our family, where Mama dished up whatever was in the cook pot with a big spoon and reaching across scooped the helping onto our plates. Other times I was to carry the bowls and platters around one by one to each person and hold it so they could help themselves, or sometimes even serve the slice of ham or beef onto the person's plate. The silver serving fork trembling in my hand, that's what she called company style, and for that I was to wear white cotton gloves which made everything much slippier. I was so scared those first days as a maid. Even more scared than I was on the day of the lunch for the ladies of the Dillon Garden Club, because that had happened so quick that I had no time to let fear grow inside me. Now I knew that I had reason to be scared, and I was always afraid of doing something wrong and upsetting Miss Bell. There was a danger of bursting into tears, weeping in front of everybody. Usually I served the whole family, Mr. Tom and Miss Eunice Bell and Catherine Jane, who looked at me oddly or pretended I wasn't there at all, and also Edward Bell, their son, who was Henry's age, just graduated from the university in Austin, Texas. Sometimes some of Edward's school friends came home with him, all of them clattering up to the third floor of the house and playing pool and other games until it was time for supper. Dinner, they called it here. Besides the family and friends, there were often guests. Most of the important people in Dillon came to dine because Mr. Thomas Bell was a lawyer and businessman and a member of the Dillon City Council and an official in his church. It was Miss Eunice's Bell notion that the table should always be set for the family and the expected guests, plus 2 extra places in case somebody came by and could be invited to stay for dinner. I was glad nobody extra came for dinner during my first week as a maid. I was still too nervous. I knew if I was to do as I promised Papa, what he called paying attention, and to what Mama called spying, I would have to stop worrying about service plates and salad forks and the lower left and raised right and become smooth and easy at what I was doing. This left me almost no time to think about Miss Emily Firth and her art classes. but once in a while it did come to mind.